NCIA members and supporters, and welcome to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series. NCIA's Industry Essentials are our new weekly educational series featuring a variety of programs, allowing us to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, and I serve as the events manager here at NCIA. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity of introducing yet another fantastic educational opportunity for you all this morning. If you're just joining us, please note that we will be conducting a moderated Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please don't hesitate to pose them either by using the Q&A feature available on the bottom toolbar, which will allow our panelists to answer questions in real time throughout the presentation, or by sending them as a message inside the chat room to all panelists or everyone in the meeting, and our team will compile them for discussion. I've had the pleasure of working with Mike and Michelle for most of the past decade and always value their insights and expertise when it comes to our government relations efforts. To that end, they've assembled an all-star panel of partners and colleagues, which will update you on lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill, inspire you with ideas on how to effectively communicate while practicing social distancing, and guide you on how to navigate the political process during this difficult time. A huge thank you to all the NCIA members joining us this afternoon. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Fireside Chats with NCIA's Government Relations Team, Staying Politically Engaged in the Age of Coronavirus, an update from Washington, D.C., being moderated by Michael Correia, Director of Government Relations here at National Cannabis Industry Association. Take it away, Mike.
There we go. Thank you, Brian. Hopefully everyone can hear me. One, I really appreciate everyone for being on and watching this or listening to this. I'm really excited. I think it's going to be great, a great conversation, great fun. As everyone knows, as the world has sort of shut down, we're finding new ways and new avenues to get our information out to our members and to the general public about what's going on in DC. And if you've been following the news, Congress is not immune to this. It has hit everyone. Congress has basically shut down. When you talk to offices, it's up to each individual office if they are working or not. But we have talked to our friends on the Hill. Most of them are staying at home. You heard the news a couple of weeks ago. The chairman of the Small Business Committee, Nydia Velasquez, actually came down with the coronavirus. No one is immune to this. They're shut down. If you're like me, you're struggling like everyone else. You haven't gotten a haircut in a couple of weeks. I've been, stuck at home for the past, I think I'm 6 weeks self-quarantined. So welcome. I wanted to just go over, I think we have a great panel. I just wanted to sort of go over that even though Congress is sort of shut down, lobbying is still going on. And I wanted to let everyone know that even though the cannabis industry is struggling, their voice is still being heard on Capitol Hill. It's just a different way. Instead of face-to-face meetings, it's on the phone, it's on the email. And I wanted to have some friends come on and join us to show what is happening with lobbying in the cannabis industry, what's going on, what's our priority, how we're being effective, what you guys can do to help us out. I think each of our panelists are part of like separate cannabis entities with their own board members, their own focus, their own membership. But at the same time, when it comes to cannabis reform, we agree on 99% of the issues. And although some people could say we're competitors, I've known each of these panelists for many years. We're friendly. We do everything we can to give Congress a unified voice, and that the cannabis industry is working together whenever we can. I think it's going to be a great discussion. And I wanted to introduce everyone and before they speak, but at the same time, I did get, just today, I got an email alert from our friends at Project SAM, which if you don't know, there are opponents on cannabis reform. And this is what they're saying. The pot industry is engaging in a full court press to get taxpayer-funded bailout from Congress under the next round of COVID stimulus funding. All while the industry has been openly celebrating record profits as its lobbyists have strong-armed straight leaders into declaring pot shops essential. It is absolutely galling when so many businesses are sacrificing to protect the health and safety of the American public. Pot shops would simultaneously demand to stay open, then request a federal bailout. a couple points. One, I'm glad that they are pointing out that we're engaging in a full court press, because we are. We're doing everything that we can to represent the cannabis industry. And I love the fact that we basically pay 280E taxes, the tax penalty. We pay taxes, but we get no benefit out of this. So not only are we not getting bailed out, we're actually getting penalized more than every other small business in America. When we're not strong-arming, the actual businesses are calling their local officials to be declared essential. And so, one, I wanted to point that out, but to let people know that our opponents are actually calling Capitol Hill, and it's very important that you need to stand up for the cannabis industry, because Capitol Hill needs to hear what's going on your end and why it's important to keep hearing from you guys. So one, I wanted to sort of give an intro to everyone, each of our panelists, and then give them sort of 30 to 60, 90 seconds to sort of give an update of what they're focusing on and their background. So first off, I'll just go across the list. Well, one, before I begin, I wanted to appreciate Michelle Rudder Freeberg, who was married, 6 months ago, Michelle. And at the same time, we've promoted her to deputy director. She's earned it. Michelle and I have known each other. Our anniversary is just 6 years from last month. And I hate to say we couldn't celebrate it. And I miss you, Michelle. I can't wait to be able to hang out with you and see you again. And as everyone knows, Michelle really runs things around here. I'm just here she makes me look good, and I definitely give her every credit whenever I can. So let's just go across. So David Mangone, he is the Director of Policy with the Liaison Group. They represent the National Cannabis Roundtable, the California Cannabis Industry Association, and the Oregon Cannabis Association. David previously worked at the Americans for Safe Access. He's been fighting a good fight for many years. I've known him for many years. And so, David, if you just want to say a couple sentences, a little background about what you're focused on, your background, and we'll just go to each panelist.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, Michelle, thank you guys so much for putting this on. It's good to see your faces over Zoom. I know I've heard your voices a lot over the last couple of weeks, but certainly good to see the faces. But yeah, we're very much what Mike said. We're looking for pathways forward that are going to lead this industry in the right direction during a really interesting and challenging time to legislate. Our top priority for my organization has been banking, and it will continue to be banking until we can get a bill out of the Senate, work something in the House. And the reason we say that is we have members who are both large and small. And while the SBA loans are tremendously helpful for a lot of our members, with a lot of the state-based relief, including in California, you can't access those programs without a traditional lending institution. So we're focusing on that. The SBA narrative has allowed us to expand on those efforts, but certainly excited to be working with all of you and excited to be part of this webinar.
Well, we're excited that you're participating with us, David. So Randal Meyer, next up, he's Executive Director with the Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce. And Randal and I have known each other for 4 years now. He used to be a staffer with Senator Paul, leading the Good Fight 5 years now, leading the Good Fight with Senator Paul's office. So Randal, if you want to give a little background.
Sure, thank you, Michael. Randal Meyer, I'm the Executive Director with Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce. We're a trade organization in the space that focuses on the global trade and the role of the United States economy within the global trade for cannabis development, and also on the public health and safety aspects of regulation for how things should look at after legalization. Right now, in the age of COVID-19, obviously, it's our role as government affairs professionals to be working with the government to try to advance its agenda on responding to this pandemic, and our shift is focused to being narrowly on the SBA loans and the safe banking issue, because these are the germane topics to trying to make sure that essential businesses and the medical supply chain is not disrupted during this pandemic for the patients who are relying on our products. And with the safe banking aspect, one of the points that's come up from our employees, our managers, and also our customers is no one wants to be dealing in cash anymore or getting within that kind of distance for a 6-foot rule. So we've been working on those issues as well. So that's GACC. Thank you.
Thank you, Randal. And last up, we have Amber Littlejohn, and she is our Senior Policy Advisor for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Amber and I have known each other 3 years now. She's wonderful, always a friendly voice, always someone I'm bouncing ideas off of, talking in the middle of the night when I just have an idea I want to run past her. So Amber, if you want to give a little background.
Just first and foremost, want to thank my friends at NCIA. You guys are great partners and great to work with, both as an individual and organizationally. The Minority Cannabis Business Association is focused on minority cannabis businesses and our communities. And that's something that makes us sort of unique as an organization, because we are not just the first and largest organization that is serving minority entrepreneurs in this space, but we also straddle our community issues. And so we're the voice within our legalization and our cannabis discussions that's always looking out for our communities. And for us, we've really, as this crisis has unfolded, we've seen this narrative, hey, the cannabis industry is doing great, but I'm hearing feedback from my members and my community that they're struggling. We not only have small businesses that don't have the resources to retool their entire operations to operate in this social and properly socially distanced. And then we have a lot of new and aspiring minority entrepreneurs that their whole process of licensing is being held up, and some of them are carrying real estate and loans. So we really, for us, we consider all of these financial issues, whether they be banking or access to small business services, we consider those to be equity issues, because without access to capital, there really is going to be no equity. And we'd like to get those numbers up from less than 5% minority owned, at least in the double digits, hopefully someday.
Well, we're all working together for the same thing. But you mentioned one thing that was going to be my first question, and that is, we've all read the news. We've seen news stories where there was sort of, I guess you could call it panic buying, where there were people going to cannabis dispensaries, buying a lot because they thought they were going to be locked in. And there were sort of news stories that I was like, oh my gosh, the cannabis industry is doing great. They're having record profits, 150, 200% of normal revenue. And that's not necessarily the case now. And that narrative is, well, why do we need to be helping the cannabis industry? So one, when we have talked to the Hill, they haven't sort of heard that narrative that, hey, businesses are struggling. So one, I want, Amber, you mentioned it, I want you to sort of lead and go around why we need to push back on the narrative, because it isn't the case.
Well, first and foremost, just like every other industry, we will be and are being impacted by this dip in the economy. We are being impacted by the stay-at-home orders. They're naturally cutting businesses. We have entire states that have either cut adult use or drastically limited adult use. Others have even limited access to medical. So that across the board, this idea that everybody is thriving is just incorrect. As you're going around and looking at the small businesses that have a lot less access to the platforms that you need to function in this socially distant, type of commerce, they lack that. And so without the resources and the deep pockets that some of the other organizations have, making that transition is difficult. And when consumers have a choice between place A and place B, when they can really minimize contact at place A and place B doesn't have as many resources, that right there is going to be an issue. And then, as I mentioned, we have 2 different programs that are waiting to come online in terms of the social equity applicants. And as many know, especially those of you that are operators, it's a very expensive process. So a successful application is going to run you at least $100,000, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So these are expenses that folks are carrying, and these programs aren't going to be opening up for even longer now, and they're not going to be able to recoup their losses. And in places like Illinois, where there are few operators, those bigger operators are getting longer to secure their places, while these little operators are going to kind of struggle. So we really want to make sure that the message is clear that, there are a few folks that are doing well, but even those, over time will feel the hurt of the economy.
Hey, David, you represent our good friends at the California Cannabis Industry Association. How are they doing out in California? California was probably the first one to lock down. We have a very friendly governor in Gavin Newsom out there who understands the importance of the cannabis industry. But what's going on with some of the California members, just the sheer size?
Well, I think Amber made a really good point about the appearance of revenue spike. I think you could make the same argument for a lot of other consumer goods. The corner store that's selling toilet paper or dish soap, they saw a revenue spike at the beginning of the pandemic as well, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be ineligible for relief from the federal or state government. So when you look at buying trends as a whole, it's not just with cannabis, it's all consumer goods. It's people looking to stockpile and stock up on things that they think they'll need over the course of a shelter-in-place order or a stay-at-home order. So it's a little bit of a twisted narrative when you say, oh, the cannabis industry is booming and all this revenue. Well, when you look at sales figures for a lot of these other industries, they are as well. But as far as California, as many people on this webinar know, before the pandemic hit, the California cannabis industry as a whole was a little bit of a mess. And that largely is because of the multi-tiered licensing system. You have to get approval from the state, you have to get approval from your locality, and sometimes there's even a third tier within the locality, within the town itself. So with all that sort of bureaucracy, it's been amplified by the designation by Gavin Newsom of businesses being essential. Gavin Newsom has said cannabis businesses are essential in the state, you still have the issue of getting that same designation with the local and municipality level. So we've had a lot of adult use businesses, they fall under the governor's essential designation, they still had a hard time implementing things like curbside pickup and delivery because of local restrictions. So it's really just amplified the problems that were already existing in the California market before the pandemic. And now it is very much front and center for the Bureau of Cannabis Control as well as for the governor's office.
Yeah, I think most states except Massachusetts have deemed it essential. But Randal, have you been hearing from some of your members as far as like revenue or just the way they're operating?
Yeah, so there's kind of to go off what David is saying, one of our members actually gave a quote to the Wall Street Journal last week saying that people were buying cannabis like toilet paper, and that's exactly real. There was a large spike at the outset of when people were going at stay-at-home orders, and then revenues has steadily declined. And one of the larger retail days during the year for cannabis businesses, I think as we all know, is April 20th, the retail holiday, shall we say, for cannabis. And those numbers were well below what was brought in last year on the same day or the year before. And that accounts for a significant portion of the entire annual retail revenue for a number of businesses. So the downturn in the retail segment is also uniquely during our largest buying season, so to speak, as far as this April. So there's actually a unique downturn in terms of the entire annualized revenue for how this pandemic has specifically affected the industry timing and sales.
So Randal, I think that puts us to a really good place. Everything that's happened recently has obviously not only put pressure on all of the businesses, all of the legislators with everything that's going on, but it's also put pressure on all of us too, to make sure that we're adequately representing our members, working hard to ensure that their interests are being heard and protected. And so I'm going to pick on you first, Randal. And ask you, this is such a critical time. I think we had in the polling a question about how many of our webinar attendees had contacted their elected officials since the coronavirus epidemic began. And of our respondents, and this is a very scientific poll, might I add, of our respondents, yes, it's a very small sample size, but we digress. We had 66% of our respondents here say yes, they had, and 34% no. So about a 2/3 split there. But Randal, Mike mentioned in your introduction that you used to work on the Hill, you worked in a senator's office, and I would love to pick your brain about not only why it's important for all of our members to continue being politically engaged right now, but also maybe all of our panelists, Amber and David, can jump in as well about, like, let's walk us through step by step what that looks like. Are there tips and tricks? What should people be mindful of? And let's keep it general. I think that this can just be, you know, when people want to contact a member of Congress about anything, it doesn't have to be coronavirus, it doesn't even have to be cannabis, but how should people go about that?
Okay, so there's two things you should definitely know in contacting a member of Congress about cannabis. The first thing is look at their record and see what they're on first. It helps us out immensely as lobbyists if there is positive reception from constituents, either in the district or the state, depending on Senate or congressional district, that they're being thanked for their current work. It reinforces their good work. It encourages them to do more and to continue evolving on the issue. And it's a very important thing to continue a positive form of messaging, especially if you're representing a business, because there, you know, however one of us interacts with offices is something that when we go in and talk to staffers, those stories get told with negative interactions. And it's important just to try to keep it positive. Make sure that while you're asking them for more, that you're taking account of what they've already done and thanking them for it. It helps us out a lot with keeping gains where they're at and moving the ball forward. The second one is always use the phone, and preferably if you're a constituent or a senator. So most offices have software, and yeah, this is not something that is well advertised. Most offices have software that records what the calls are and what the nature of the topic is and what the positivity towards specific legislation or endeavors is. Those get aggregated over weeks, over months, over years, and that helps dictate policy in the office. So while an individual call might seem, you know, unimportant to the office, it is an incredibly important data metric for the staffers in the offices in determining what constituents want. And they do tell, like, is this area code from constituent cell phone or constituent home line, and go through that entire process. So the calls matter. They really, really matter from individuals.
Hey, before Michelle goes on, you bring up a good point, Randall, because I always remember when I was on the Hill, if something big was on Fox News the next day, you knew it because your phones were ringing off the hook.
Yep, when the phones are ringing, it is a metric, and the consistency of calls, like even if there's not a big thing going on, call once a month. Have your employees, your partners call once a month. Keep the numbers up. Show statistically that constituents care. It's the easiest way to do it. Just a phone call.
Randall, do you have thoughts or any tips and tricks about calling the district office versus the DC office?
Call the DC office. Call the DC personal offices for the representatives. They have different data aggregation systems that aren't necessarily integrated for recording those.
I will add a asterisk to that. I think right now, if you're dealing with a issue that relates directly to small business funding, the caseworkers in the districts can provide a lot of good resources for that. And I would like to echo Randall's idea of calling offices. When you send emails in this same aggregating system, these emails are automatically tagged depending on the software you use. So frequently, with our issue, whether you use cannabis or marijuana, it ends up in a staffer's email inbox. You may not necessarily want to be directing that towards. That happens a lot with medical facilities, is, you know, it ends up with the criminal justice staffer or the judiciary staffer. And if you're talking about a medical issue, a research issue, patient access, it can lengthen your process and response time and might get you a pretty generic form letter on the way back. So calling is the way to go. They can always put you on hold and redirect you to the appropriate person in the office, but it's a lot quicker to pick up the phone than to sift through emails to get someone's attention.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. If you're having issues with SBA, if you need something done specific in the district that's specific in casework, call the district office. But if you're trying to affect the numbers in federal legislation, call the personal office of the representative, not a leadership office, the personal office. I'll just add the last thing on that is what David is talking about with direction to staffers, favorable and non-favorable. The call aggregations usually in 9 out of 10 offices go to the chief every week, and then there's a monthly report. So that's the easiest way to get the most senior staffer to be looking at the popularity of the issues.
I think the only thing that I would add is that folks are confident that their representative wants to hear from them. I know sometimes when I'm working with member companies on the Hill, there's a lot of folks are very timid about sharing their message. But in truth, your message is way more impactful than what we can deliver, because we deliver messages professionally. But when you get there and you're speaking in your own words and you're personalizing these issues, they're no longer abstract. So understand, you don't have to have all the acronyms right. You don't have to have all the policy, just hammered down. What they really want to hear is your experience and how the laws are impacting you. So I just really encourage people to be confident as they go forward and share their voice and their stories, and understand that the stories you have to share are actually way more impactful even than the conversations that we have, because they really do matter. So I hate when I hear folks being timid or thinking that their voice doesn't matter to the representative.
You bring up a good point, Amber. Everyone thinks, oh, lobbyists have so much power. And when in reality, politicians love hearing from their constituents. They love slam dunk issues. They love 80-20 issues. They don't like getting in front of a social movement, doing 50-50 issues. Where's this going to go? Their politicians are risk averse. And when something happens, they want to make sure they're going to be on the right side of this. And I hate to say it, some of these issues like cannabis take some time before it ever gets up to someone's radar screen. But I wanted to bring up a good point. Unless anyone is on this webinar who's over 100 years old, I doubt it, no one has lived through really a pandemic before. And so this came out and no one really knew what to do. And we in the cannabis industry, we're all thinking, okay, what's our ask? What are we going to be pushing members for? How are we going to be dealing with this? And this was brand new, and we, all the people on this webinar and others, have talked together, and we tried to get what our ask would be and what we could do to make sure we were laser focused on Capitol Hill and our message wasn't getting lost. And I'd love to hear from the other panelists, but when I was doing phone calls, offices were appreciative. We weren't just hammering them because they were getting hammered by a million different lobbyists and sources constantly on this. They were appreciative that we were patient with this. And I remember some of them basically said, listen, we're focusing on just COVID and COVID related issues. This is now not the time to hit a home run and to go for a home run and try to get cannabis legalization or cannabis rescheduling or try to get 280E passed. We're not going to be doing cannabis related stuff, but this is the time where if it's related to COVID, there's a good actual, I think, message in there. And so I would love to hear if you guys were hearing sort of the same stories on your phone call about, how receptive they were to it. Anyone want to jump in?
I'll take it.
Sure.
I was just going to say, no, I think that you're completely right, Mike. I mean, it's important to remember right now, that there's a long list of priorities. Mike, you've always had a saying for the people who've been to our lobby days before. You've said this a million times. You'll say, you ask a member of Congress, what's the top 100 issues that they're focused on, and marijuana is number 101. And unfortunately, I see everyone smiling because we all have experienced that far too often in our lives. And it's really, really important. All of us are walking a fine line, at least right now. I can speak for myself in terms of, again, being mindful of the fact that, especially a couple weeks ago when things, not that things aren't dire now, but when things were even more new, and we were still in a much more fluid place, members of Congress or their offices are like, look, like we can't, we can't have this conversation right now. We're busy focusing on, full on economic collapse and a pandemic that, like you said, we haven't seen in 100 years. But at the same time, it's our job to, again, make sure that our member businesses and our industry is not forgotten. We obviously want to be respectful of everybody and the times that we're living in. But again, we have all of our members calling and saying, well, I had to lay people off, or now someone has lost their livelihood because they had to be furloughed or take a pay cut, or they maybe can't put food on the dinner table. I mean, these are serious issues that are not industry specific, that they apply to everybody in the nation. And so that's why I think it's just super, super important that we as lobbyists continue to carry that water and carry that message. But again, bringing it back to what Amber was saying about members of Congress wanting to hear your stories, that 34% of you that haven't contacted your elected officials, I hope that this webinar has changed your mind.
Yeah, just to throw on the tail end of what you and Michael were saying, is that it is the 101 issue out of 100, despite the fact that medical cannabis polls over 95%. It's beyond an 80-20 issue. It's an obvious issue for medical cannabis, federally at least, and yet it's still not done. The only reason is because of the ranking in the polling. And that's why it's important to call offices and to respond to polls, because that is what contributes to the numbers that drive the 80-20 issues going through. And it makes our lives much easier when we have those calls going through versus not. And that's what all I'm to add there.
One of the messages that I've received from the Hill is that we are watching you, and we are watching how you conduct yourself. We are watching, are you being greedy and trying to push issues that are not germane? What are you doing to flatten the curve? What are you as an industry doing collectively to just be good corporate citizens? So it's not just in how we're going to be delivering the message on the Hill and being sensitive to this unique time that we're in, but it's also about stepping up as an industry and collectively coming together and looking at what you're doing as a company and as an industry to show our maturity. Because again, this is a very great opportunity for us to be able to show that we really are a responsible industry that cares about your safety and your health, because we are made up of a lot of people that truly believe in the products that we sell and the industry that we represent. So it's really a great time for us to show that. And we've seen a lot of that as companies have stepped up and been making PPE and hand sanitizer and really just being very proactive in their measures. So we appreciate that work. And again, so Congress is watching, and they've let us know that they're watching us as an industry, and they're watching your individual companies. Don't let that scare you, but just to see what kind of citizens we're being during this time. So that is definitely part of the whole kind of package and how we're approaching, and it makes a difference in how difficult it is to move the message here on Capitol Hill, depending on how you're responding.
You bring up a great point, and one, knock on wood, one of these days we're going to return back to normal, and the Capitol is going to open up, and we're going to go back to lobbying. And the last thing I want to do, this is, 7 years I've been doing this, is burning bridges and pissing off our friends on Capitol Hill, all in the name of trying to get something short term that really probably doesn't have a big chance of passing. And so, yeah, definitely now is not the time to be greedy. Now is not the time to be like, hey, we just want to make money off the back of this, never let a good crisis go to waste. No, now is a good time to show them we're doing best practices and we're honest operators and we're doing what's in the best interest for health and other reasons during this. But I'd love to hear, David, if you've been hearing similar stuff.
Yeah, Mike and Amber as well. I think that everyone on this webinar and the folks that we work with in other associations and other nonprofits have all been very measured in their response so far. And I think that's been very well received by Capitol Hill. We weren't in package 1, package 2, banging down the door, demanding that we be included. We took a realistic look about where the gaps were for our industry and where we would naturally fit in. And of course, that first conversation was the SBA loans. We had guidance from the SBA that directly said that cannabis businesses couldn't apply for these SBA loans. In the emergency rule, it says businesses that are illegal under state or federal law need not apply. So there was a natural progression to that legislation that was introduced by Earl Blumenauer, a number of letters that have been circulated immediately because of what had been passed out of the first few packages for the stimulus packages. And then the safe banking conversation was another natural progression. We had a lot of good conversations with members about the potential for contamination on cash, the inability to comply with social distancing procedures when you have to do a cash transaction, opening the register, waiting for your change, etc. So I think the fact that we did not immediately jump into that type of aggressive narrative where we were saying, here's our entire list of demands, was really helpful. And I'm glad that Amber mentioned what we're doing to flatten the curve. I was going to bring this up a little bit later, but the National Cannabis Roundtable partnered with Leafly in terms of a job survey seeing where the industry is either hurting or hiring from other industries. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat. It was originally sent out to 15,000 businesses, but certainly any data that we can provide for that survey with Leafly is helpful as a data point as we have those conversations with members.
And I wanted to, well, thank you for that. One, I wanted to let people know, we're all friendly and we regularly communicate and sort of work on strategies going forward. And, Michelle, I would love, you to ask a couple questions. Everyone on this call has been doing a lot of coordinating, a lot of talking, letters, everything. But if you want to mention some of the, I guess, output we've been sending out and some of the results of some of that.
Sure. I mean, I won't mention everything. I want to make sure everybody here has an opportunity to talk about all the wonderful stuff that we have been working on collectively as a sort of informal coalition of associations, I guess you could call us. But one of the things I think that's been really, really impactful, at least in my opinion, and I think is really, really changing the conversation around this issue is the set of letters that we saw come out of both houses of Congress within the last about 10 days or so. So initially, we, and by we, I mean everybody on this call, MCBA, GACC, NCR, and NCIA, along with some of our other partners in this space as well, were whipped offices to get them to sign on to a letter that Congressman Earl Blumenauer, of course, everybody knows him, one of our greatest champions on Capitol Hill, was circulating, that was focused around SBA funds and how cannabis industry businesses as well as ancillary businesses should be able to access those funds. So we were really, really proud to work that letter around the House. And at the end of the day, I think we had, guys, like 34, I think, bipartisan signers onto that letter, which was really, really great. And then just a few days after that, we saw the Senate companion, which was worked on by Senators Rosen and Wyden over in the Senate, had, I believe, 11 signers. Unfortunately, no Republicans signed onto the Senate version. So it was a partisan letter. But regardless, I think it's just really, again, as somebody who has worked in this space for a long time and seen the way that it's, the conversation has shifted around it and how those discussions have progressed, I think that it's really, really remarkable that at a time of, frankly, international pandemic, that we are still able to, get about 50 members of Congress to sign on to a letter that says that the cannabis industry is just like any other small business that needs help and relief during this difficult time. So those letters were something we worked on. I don't know, Randall, if maybe you want to talk a little bit about some of the other letters we did. Maybe you want to talk about the treasurer's one. I don't know if Amber maybe wants to talk about the medical access one, and then David, if you want to talk about the California one. There's definitely no shortage of letters right now.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure working with our partners at NCIA, MCBA, NCR, with our informal coalition of what we've been working on. It's been immensely fun and productive since we've all known each other for several years and have pretty refined styles with how to deal with the different segments of Congress with each other. One of our efforts so far has been to send a letter to state treasurers and governors asking them to speak with their congressional delegations about safe banking access, SBA access, during the COVID-19 pandemic. The issue being specifically that with the essential business declarations and with the cash nature of the business, there's an increased transmission risk, particularly considering that there's a large compromised base of clientele for the businesses. So there's a very good public policy reason to do this legislation as part of the aspect of flattening the curve, making sure that the medical supply chain remains intact. We're really happy to actually get some very positive responses from those letters from a couple of treasurers. Nothing we can share publicly, but things that have been very helpful behind the scenes with producing more and more members of Congress publicly getting in favor of certain of these issues. And also the second thing we did ask for was for states to create their own relief funds in the way of SBA, PPP, or EDIL loans. And a couple of treasurers did respond that they were under the way, that such programs either underway in the states or already available. And I think the list of that's available through associations. So it's been that was a solid set of responses we got that helped drive federal policy. And it's wonderful to take that situation we've learned about taking the state victories and translate it to federal win and turning into a more realizable gains on better scale. I think Amber or David is next.
Amber, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure thing. One of the other letters that we sent out was the medical access letter. So what we did is we identified some key medical states where there were gaps. So we created a list of really policy priorities that we wanted to see in place in either, ideally in permanent, but definitely in the temporary regulations to make sure that we had continued safe access to medical cannabis. That included delivery in all parts of the state, curbside, waived provider fees, extensions of documentation expiration, and a few other things. And so what we did is we just compared what states had done, thanked the lawmakers for the leadership and the work that they had already put in, as many of the states had already, declared medical cannabis essential and put in place some regulations. But we really wanted to make sure that medical cannabis patients had continued access, and that employees were safe, and that patients were safe. So again, we were able to get those out and got responses back from some of the states, and we've really seen the states have really stepped up, and it is definitely encouraging, and we're hoping that that momentum, and we started off with the letter from Sam, and I think that has to do with the fact that states have really responded with a strong statement that cannabis is necessary and it's recognized. And so I think it does have our opponents a little bit concerned.
Yeah, so I'll talk briefly about a letter that we are working on. When we were in the appropriations process last year, we had a lot of victories in the House in terms of cannabis reform. When we ended up seeing the final package, it basically remained business as usual, with just the Blumenauer-Joyce Amendment protecting medical programs from DOJ interference. So a lot of folks in the industry sort of asked the question, what happened? And we were fairly frankly told that no one brought cannabis as a priority into the final negotiations for conference. So, we were trying to figure out exactly why that was, had some good conversations with leadership, and, we were fairly frankly told by Speaker Pelosi that if she heard from a large portion of her delegation or her caucus that that was an issue that they needed to see be fought for, she would fight for it. So we're organizing a California delegation letter from the California congressional delegation about safe banking and how it can be used both as a tool for economic growth, but also as a tool for enhanced public safety during COVID-19. So we're currently collecting signatures for that. Certainly we encourage anyone who operates in California or is licensed in California on this webinar to reach out to their member and ask them about the letter. It's being led by Rep. Porter, Correia, and Ted Liu. And I think there's about 15 signatures on it right now, and it's closing on Friday. I'm happy to have my email at the end of this if you need more details on that. But it's important for us to send a message as an industry to keep the largest section of the industry accountable through their congressional members. So I'm going to address something real quick because I can't resist. I think with Feinstein, she needs to hear every day from California businesses about how terrible she's been on the issue. You need to call her office every day to the point where people know your voice as soon as you start talking about the issues you want to complain about. There is no reason why the senior senator from California should be as bad on this issue as she is.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first, folks. And sorry, Mike, to cut you off. I just want to remind everybody to make sure you're using your chat feature. We're going to move to questions here in not too long. So make sure you're putting any of the questions that you may have for us in this chat feature box. But before we move to questions, I actually want to ask you guys a question that I've been getting a lot. So I want to put you guys on the hot seat because maybe it's something that's going to come up. Anyway, Jacqueline, that was Senator Feinstein that David was just talking about as well from California. Something that I've been getting asked about a lot, David, you touched on this about the reason that the cannabis industry is ineligible for a lot of these funds is because of a definition from the SBA that I think came out back in 2018, and that differentiates between both direct marijuana businesses and indirect marijuana businesses. And something that I've been getting asked a lot, and I know we've talked about it, all of us on calls and with members of Congress, is about there's been questions about are we going to make a push for just indirect businesses to be eligible for these funds, and what does that look like? And so I know what I've been saying to people, but I'm sure that's something on some of our attendees' minds. So would love if you guys maybe want to address that as well before we move on.
Depends who I'm talking to. You know, with some members, you know, there's a realistic pathway for asking for everything that we want. With other members, including the current chairman of the Senate Small Business Committee, Marco Rubio, it's been inch by inch. So first, it was getting him to acknowledge the size and legitimacy of the cannabis industry in Florida. I think we're slowly but surely getting him to actually recognize that there are businesses in his state that serve those businesses that are doing nothing illegal under state law. I don't know if he's there yet. Certainly would welcome anyone's input on where he stands, but it's, you know, we are in the process of incrementalism right now. That's how these packages are working. Like Mike said earlier, now's not the time to swing for the fences. If we could get a legislative win outside of appropriations, I think it would be tremendous progress for the industry and for the movement. But that being said, I'm not immediately ready to concede the things that we're asking for just to play politics.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to address that because I've been getting that question a lot. And my answer has been pretty similar, David, in that, you know, we want to be realistic and we want to, you know, we all understand the importance of making a deal. That's the only way a lot of things get done in this town. But at the same time, really want to reiterate to all of our members that if you are a direct marijuana business or you are a plant touching company, that by no means are we going to throw you under the bus to make a deal for our friends over on the ancillary side of things. So I thought that was important to address that.
NCBA is,
oh yeah, go for it, Amber, sorry.
NCBA is in a bit of a unique position again, in that we could never divorce the two. Of course, we're advocating for both, but our fundamental mission is to end prohibition for a multitude of reasons. So for us, just ending prohibition for the ancillary businesses wouldn't be accomplishing our goal, and we don't want to undermine the end goal. David mentioned a word that I wanna clarify because I feel like I know enough about David and the folks on the phone. Incrementalism is something that's thrown around as negative, that the industry wants incrementalism and that's bad for everybody else and it's gonna hang everybody else out to dry. I will tell you that right now we have, again, MCBA being in a unique position where you had folks coming from the social justice and advocacy centers and organizations that were saying incrementalism of any kind is bad. And we don't believe that as an organization. We believe that there are some good small changes like safe banking that actually address key equity issues. And there are other forms of incrementalism that we don't support. And out of respect to my colleagues on the phone, I won't go into that. But we have a spectrum of what we consider good incrementalism and bad, and not all incremental progress is bad.
When I took this job in 2013, I had envisioned this being an 8 to 10 year process, and I'm in year 7. And I want to bring some realism. Cannabis isn't going to be legalized today, this week, this month, or this year. When what you're doing as a lobbyist are growing your friends, you're increasing your base. A politician is not going to be anti-communist or anti-cannabis on Monday, and then after they talk to me, they're going to be a champion. You know, I tell our attendees at lobby days, you want to turn a vocal no into a silent no, a no into a maybe into a yes, and a yes into a champion. And that takes time. And so when an event like COVID happens, you're already going to have people on the Hill who are your champions who are willing, oh, let me do something, let me circulate a letter, let me start doing something. the work had already been, we had already put the work into it years before, and you're just now starting to see the results of something like that. And so I know on a personal level, I've been struggling with this. My whole job in existence is being out there and going to fundraisers and going to events and going to receptions and face-to-face and interacting and developing these friendships. And now to be isolated, it has been sort of a struggle during this whole process. But I know it's 3:55, and I wanted to get to a couple questions, Meow.
I have a question before we turn to the chat box. So this is another one, and I want to again encourage people to use that chat feature if you haven't already. Seen 1 or 2 questions come through, but want to make sure that we are answering any of the questions or concerns that you guys have while you have all of this wonderful knowledge here in front of you. I also wanted to ask a quick question though to our panelists, and Randal, I'm going to pick on you this time. I feel like I haven't heard from you in a minute. I wanted to hear about, there's been a lot of talk, we've all discussed about federal funds here, but another question we've been getting a lot on all of us is, can the states use any of this money to help out cannabis businesses? Where does that stand? Where do you, using your crystal ball, what do you see there?
So right now, no, the states can't use any of the funds that are being distributed by the federal government to help out cannabis businesses, even if they're contained within block grants or block distributions to states. There's various federal guidance from the executive administrations that implement the statutes on how to interpret some really arcane thing called appropriations law, which is actually a field of law, if you've never heard of it, that has a very specific set of doctrines on how to work through that. What is something that we're focusing more on, and what the trades have been working on collectively, is trying to get some statutory changes that would alter the law that tells the agency what to do. Regulations are based on a statute. You can't have a regulation that contradicts a statute. The statute always wins. So that's kind of where I know that we've been working on going forward. And that's part of the process that we were talking about just a second ago of what we call intelligent incrementalism. Now, for example, this Congress has given us a ton of information on how to proceed for the next 5 years. We have 321 votes on the Safe Banking Act. In terms of the piece of legislation that might be the first piece of federal reform, it is by far and away the front runner for what would possibly get passed, because it's the first thing in 85 years that's passed either chamber of Congress as a cannabis reform statutory law. The other part of intelligent incrementalism is not over asking on statutory law versus an appropriations rider like the Blumenauer Amendment. If something can be accomplished via an appropriations rider, don't waste time or political capital on statutory law doing it. That's not an intelligent expense of your resources to get to the end goal, which is descheduling with a clear regulatory infrastructure. Use the pieces Congress has given you along the way, be smart, and don't waste resources on things that aren't going to work or don't have support building on it. If you hit a wall, change tactics. And this Congress has given us all the information that I think we need to really be progressing forward towards that descheduling goal in a real way. So that's kind of that read.
That was really awesome. Thank you, Randal. No, I think that helped me understand this a better way to explain it to some other people. So I'm sure it was helpful for many of us. So I want to go ahead and switch over to some questions right now. But we have a question from Jennifer that says, what is the likelihood of the Safe Banking Act moving forward in some form, either as an addition to COVID stimulus bills or reviving this summer for serious consideration? And the second part of that question is, okay, so what's the likelihood of SAFE passing, whether it's attached to COVID or otherwise? And how can we, meaning cannabis businesses and local trade associations, help support pushing this effort through?
I'll go ahead and get started.
I want to go around and let everyone else chat before I chime in. Go for it, David.
Yeah, as a federal lobbyist, I think my least favorite question is one about likelihood. It's something that, it's not a black and white. It's not like a gamble like you're in Vegas. It's a process, and we have more legislative vehicles to attach something like safe banking to than we've had in many of the previous years combined. Typically, we're looking at the annual appropriations process as our singular vehicle to attach substantive policy legislation to. In the last month, we've had we've had 4 packages that have been substantive policy that have moved incredibly quickly through not only the committee process, but through the entire process of voting. Frankly, for some of the first packages, there was very little committee process, which is probably why they moved so quickly. And I think we've all been of the agreement that safe banking on its own was never going to pass this current Congress as a standalone bill. Leader McConnell is too against the underlying notions of doing anything for the cannabis industry to put that standalone bill on the floor. Where we thought there was a pathway for success was part of a larger package where, you know, some members may not like everything that's in it, much like an appropriations bill, but they agreed with the overall intent and spirit of the legislation. So as Congress continues to address issues surrounding COVID, there's going to be more packages of various sizes moving through both chambers that are going to serve as good attachment vehicles for something like SAFE, for something like SBA relief. As far as what you can do as a business, it's just making sure that members know the struggles that you're going through beyond that you don't have access to a bank account. Like, what does that mean for your bottom line revenue? What protocols do you have to put in place to transport cash from your dispensary to where you're storing it if you're not storing it on site? It's those types of technical details that we can summarize for members, but, you know, showing them the pictures of the cash that you have to put in duffel bags to pay your taxes is really impactful. Talking about the security measures you have to put in place to make sure that your employees aren't harmed during the workday is really impactful. And those stories are ones that you all can tell a whole lot better than we can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And basically when a bill gets voted on, it has to have leadership approval, House and Senate, and it usually has to have committees of jurisdiction. House and Senate give a thumbs up. The fact that it already passed the House with a supermajority overwhelming is amazing. But the fact that the Senate banking chair, Michael Crapo, has decided to draw a line in the sand on this bill, and I don't think be very open to negotiation and changes and possibly moving it, even though he has said that. Randall and I were on a phone call with their office last week, and I don't think they've budged any. And I think that's going to be very hard until Senator Crapo signs off on something, until Leader McConnell says, I'm willing to move this forward. We're going to be where we were, you know, earlier in this year, last year, the year before. But Randall, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but just my view on SAFE, until that dynamic changes, it's going to be really hard to move a standalone bill.
So my general thought is the most valuable thing in Congress is Senate floor time. It is fought for, scraped for every inch of the thing, and the only person who gets to give it out is the majority leader. And he never wants to give it to anyone because every time he gives it to someone, he doesn't get a nominee because you can't process a nomination at the same time as legislation. So from a tactical perspective, what the industry has to understand, and something we've worked very well collectively on understanding and dealing with tactics on, is that in order to get floor time, there has to be a really good reason for anything to get floor time. And we should be attached to something that has a larger reason for getting passed, like a larger bill for any sort of relief effort, reauthorization, or anything else. The Senate doesn't give out a lot of time for individual bills. I think, and it's extremely rare that a senator ever even gets into the bargaining position where they can even get floor time for an individual standalone bill of what they're trying to process. So it's important that we focus on aligning the Senate politics, making sure that we're working with our allies in the Senate and expanding what we're doing, and working with the chairman of the relevant committees on finance, banking, and health to be processing through those kinds of issues on SAFE and making sure that we're aligning those possible areas, because, you know, Senate jurisdiction is a much different matter of, okay, is my bill included too? Great, then I don't have to go through markup with everyone else and it gets attached and we go to the floor, happy. Then we move forward. So there's the chairman game and the leadership game. The fact that we're at that point as an industry compared to where we were 3 years ago is incredible. It's a great expansion, and it's in part because of the drive we had on safe banking in the House. So that's, to answer the core question of what are the odds of safe banking passing, I'd say it's very likely it's going to pass. It's a question of when. And that's something that we, as government affairs professionals, are trying to advance on and find the exact right opportunities to move it forward. And we might get one soon. We might not. That's just how this works.
Just again, I agree with everything that my colleague said, but hopefully can leave it on a slightly more optimistic note, and that's that we are doing that dance right now with the chairman and with the committees, and we have been doing those dances. A lot of the things that you've seen us work on, whether they be developing regulatory frameworks, addressing public health and safety issues, those are all not only the right thing to do, but part of a bigger goal to move the message and to be able to kind of compel some of our opponents. So we are constantly working. It is front and center in all that we are doing, and we're making progress.
There's a question on the Blumenauer bill that got introduced last week, HR 6602, Emergency Cannabis Small Business Health and Safety Act. My take is, it's standalone bill.
Why don't you back up and just say what it is? Yeah.
Okay, you want to do that, Michelle?
Sure. I just want to make sure anybody who wasn't familiar with it yet, this bill was introduced last week. It's a very simple bill. All it essentially says is that the Small Business Administration can't deny you a 7A loan or an EIDL loan or so on solely because of your definition as an indirect or direct cannabis business.
And the point is, even though it's a standalone bill, is to have the language available as it moves through, to have that discussion. So as leadership is going on their next stimulus package 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, that there's language available. So I don't think standalone, I don't think it's going to move. I think it's just available to have it available for language. I don't know if anyone thinks differently, but that's sort of my take on the whole point of having that bill just out there to gain a little momentum, to have some language.
Yeah, it's about rolling it up. You need the language out from Legislative Council, so it could be rolled into a package when leadership does a member ask.
Cool. Michelle, do we want to go back and look over if there's some other questions? I know it's 5 after.
No, I think we got to the bulk of
Go figure. We have 6 or 5 people from DC that love talking, and we went over. But I want to keep talking to get to some of the questions. Are there any questions in here that we're missing?
I think we've gotten to most of our questions. I guess I just want to turn it over to our panelists for any last closing thoughts before Brian goes ahead and closes us down. So for me, I'll go first since I have the microphone. I almost said the microwave right now. That's about the kind of coronavirus brain I have. The closing thought I want to leave our participants with is just that we are very, very grateful for all of you. As weird as it is being home for however many days it's been now, I've actually heard from more of our members and had more conversations with a lot of our business owners and their employees since this started, just so that I can take those messages and carry them on to DC. So that's been a real silver lining of being able to connect with you all, and just want to remind you all that we're here for you. Like we've said many times, that we're all exploring any and every avenue. I feel comforted knowing that I have the wonderful people on this webinar here in our corner to help with that. And so just want to thank all of the wonderful NCIA members who make possible what we do. So thank you. Closing thoughts, anyone?
I have closing thoughts, but I'll finish up and let everyone else jump in.
Yeah, continue to stay engaged. It makes it a lot easier for us to do our job remotely when we can bring good stories of what the businesses that we represent are doing, both in terms of flattening the curve as well as adapting to this new way of doing business. And secondly, remember that there are still individuals in jail for using the products that we all endorse and sell. Please chat with our friends at the Last Prisoner Project to get those folks out.
Call your congressman, call them regularly. Have your friends call your congressman, have employees, partners, businesses, family members, call your congressperson. Just, it really does matter. I cannot stress enough that it does matter.
Just keep telling your story. Again, make those phone calls, reach out to media outlets, put it on social media, but make sure that your story is heard and that folks are aware of what's going on and why you need this change.
One, I just saw a note. Easiest way to call your congressman. One, you can
I'll
just
drop it in the comments.
Okay, perfect. One, my last comments were, I think Brian can mention this. I think this is open just to NCIA members. So all the members out there, we really appreciate it. When, Michelle and I and everyone else does this full time, the sad part during this is we had to postpone and move our lobby days until September because we would have been ramping up for that in a couple weeks. We talk to our members. That is one of the highlights of their years, being able to come out to DC, lobby, see what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, meet some of the other members, meet some members of Congress. And so, one, appreciate you. This couldn't happen without your membership. Be involved, be engaged, come out for lobby days when that happens. And with that, I guess we'll let Brian close us out.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for that panel. Let's give our panelists a big virtual round of applause by posting a thank you message in the chat room, and let them know what the most useful piece of information that you took away from this presentation was while I'm presenting these few outro slides. You will all receive a PDF version of this presentation immediately following the conclusion of the webinar. So you can utilize this contact information slide as a really useful resource to reach out and get in touch with any of these amazing panelists if you have any follow-up questions or wanted to utilize them for any services or needs that you had yourself. Thank you, David, for prompting everybody to get in touch with the Last Prisoner Project. I think that was a fantastic way to end this conversation. And Mike, you sort of stole my outro. I was going to be saying I feel sort of remiss right now because right now we're always ramping up for lobby days. So I think this was a really timely conversation that all of you all were able to pull together for us. So again, I really appreciate all of your time and expertise. With that, I did want to close things out with just a few quick announcements to everybody if you haven't been aware. So in case you did miss it, over the last few weeks, we have decided to postpone our upcoming 7th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo from June until late September. This decision was not made lightly. However, NCIA's primary goal throughout this crisis is protecting the health and safety of our community and the nation at large. Head to cannabisbusinesssummit.com to sign up to receive all the exciting news we'll be releasing in the coming weeks, including a very special keynote speaker we can't wait to tell you about, and some exciting developments for any product brand that's hoping to make a big splash on the expo floor this year. This will surely be a can't miss event and one we'll all desperately need on the other end of this crisis. So as soon as you're able to commit to traveling to an in-person trade show later this year, sign up to ensure you are at the epicenter of the cannabis industry this fall. And as Mike mentioned, we sadly also have postponed our 10th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days until this fall as well. However, along with that postponement, we've also made a number of structural changes to the event, which will provide a more all-inclusive experience to the NCIA members volunteering their valuable time to our efforts. Admission, which is still just a nominal fee, will now cover the cost for all attendees to participate in our welcome reception, breakfast training, and our new closing celebration in support of the NCIA PAC. We'll also be hosting the second edition of our new VIP Day, which provides even more access and opportunities to participate in historic moments on Capitol Hill with fellow cannabis industry leaders, as well as our congressional champions. We're hoping to bring together all of those who have participated in the past, as well as hundreds of newcomers this year to celebrate the 10th anniversary of our organization and the historic progress we've made together this past decade. So mark your calendars today, as the most impactful 2 days for cannabis industry advocacy will now be held from September 15th to the 17th, and you can register today at thecannabisindustry.org/2020 lobby days. Finally, have you or your business felt the pinch from a lack of exposure at in-person events these past few weeks? Well, you're not alone, and NCIA, as always, is here to assist. We're super excited to announce we just released a wealth of digital marketing sponsorship packages across all of our highly trafficked platforms. You can head to our website to learn more and schedule a meeting with one of our biz dev team to discuss in more detail today. And last but not least, I would like to formally invite all of you to attend the next edition of our new Industry Essentials educational webinar series taking place next week. As you all just found out, NCIA's Industry Essentials are our new weekly educational series featuring a variety of programs, some members only, some public facing, which allow us to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when you need it the most. Next up on Wednesday, we had the second edition of our Policy Council Conversation series featuring Karen Bernstein, Christopher Passarelli, Max Schnurrenberger, and Ross Gordon presenting a session entitled Protecting Your Cannabis Brand. This session is free to attend, so if you haven't already, please head to NCIA's website to sign up today and invite as many of your colleagues who might be interested in joining as well. And finally, a huge thank you for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Our GR work and this content wouldn't be possible without the hard work and dedication of our nearly 2,000 NCIA member businesses. So thank you all for the support of our efforts over the past decade. I hope you all enjoy a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next Wednesday. Have a great one.